We now turn to our top story, US President Donald Trump's comments on the idea of US taking over the Gaza Strip and displacing the Gazans. To talk about it, joining me is Dr. Swasti Rao, foreign affairs expert. Good evening and welcome, Dr. Rao. Now, President Trump continues to make uproar over his actions and statements. Now, what do you make of the intent behind the statement about US taking over Gaza? It is a radical shift from his own position of 2020.
Well, absolutely. Good evening to you. And indeed, Trump has taken the entire world by storm. And I have referred to it as the fact that Trump has been trolling everybody possible, not just his adversaries, but also his allies. And as you can see that he's keeping everybody destabilized, whether it's the traditional allies of the United States or the traditional adversaries. Now, coming to the point on Gaza, I personally would not read too much into it because obviously this is something which will never be accepted by countries like Saudi Arabia. In fact, if you see that the rebuke has started coming already. Countries from Europe to Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, all these countries have expressed, displeasure on this, especially Saudi Arabia. This will never be acceptable. To Gaza itself, it would never be acceptable. But I think one has to sort of understand the finer nuances there, which is that on the one hand, please remember that for the first time, Donald Trump, before he took oath as president, before his inauguration on the 20th of January, he went to the extent of saying that there is no Palestine to a question that was asked. And that itself probably should have rung the alarm bells as to what he has in mind. That said, later, if he is serious about it, it would be a major shift from the US foreign policy towards the Middle East, because so far it's been the two-state solution, no matter how difficult and elusive it has been in reality. So very quickly, I would not read too much into it. Perhaps it is just another reiteration of how he's keeping everybody destabilized. It's a psychological pressure to try and tell the countries of the Middle East to come back to normalization whenever that happens. Because please remember that Trump has been trying to project himself as this alpha male deal maker. And he's going to go to any extent possible to try and show, certain key takeaways. So I would perhaps wait and see whether this is a psychological pressure tactic to try and normalize the situation and force the countries of the region to normalize ties with Israel eventually. Or does he really mean all that he said, which was extremely outlandish about creating a heaven and creating a, resort and God knows what? I would really take that with a pinch of salt, just like I would take his threats to Greenland and threats to Panama. All of that is more of a psychological, pressure rather than a real foreign policy shift in America's foreign policy.
Sure, fair point, Dr. Rao. But however problematic, if we were for a moment to consider American presence, perhaps even a base in Gaza, what would that mean for the US, for Israel, for Iran and the region?
Yeah, absolutely. So first things first, unlike, the 2020 era, when Donald Trump was instrumental in actually normalizing ties among different players, it was, if you remember the Abraham Accords, they were celebrated because they were just so unique and they ushered in a new era. Okay, and if you look at it from India's perspective, exactly, it is because of the normalization, one of which was already done between Israel and UAE, and the other between Israel and Saudi Arabia was underway, was because of the reason, that was the reason where the strategic quadrilateral line, the I2U2, or the IMEC, the very ambitious IMEC project was basically coming from. That was the basis. Now, when you see Donald Trump returning and saying that he's going to take over Gaza, and he also drops extremely unambiguous hints of an ethnic cleansing of Palestinians and turning the enclave into the Riviera of the Middle East, obviously, this is something which is an extreme shift because it means that America has come back to the Middle East. So for a lot of time, for the last few years, the American foreign policy shift from the CENTCOM to PACOM and Indo-Pacific Command, etc., has been one of the major, pillars of how America's foreign policy has evolved. Okay, and this is how we've been talking about it. Like I said, that this definitely means bad news for Iran. This is, I wouldn't say this is all good news for Israel, because end of the day, like I said, that Trump is interested in showing the world that he's capable of pulling off the deal, whether it's in Israel or in Ukraine. So we will have to see where this is going. But at the same time, this is also a bit of a shock treatment for the rest of the world in terms of trying to predict what Trump has in mind. And perhaps what he seems to be very serious about is to ensure that he remains as unpredictable as possible.
Right. Dr. Rao, could you also give us a perspective on the manner in which this proposal itself, as provocative as it may be, violates a lot of international provisions, including UNSC and UNGA regulation on the right of the Palestinian people for self-determination?
Oh, well, absolutely. See, on the one hand, whatever has been happening in Israel on the ground has been a violation of United Nations General Assembly regulations. I mean, where there is no doubt about that. And there have been a lot of critics of Israel that have come forward and always asserted that this is what is happening is absolutely against the international regulations there. In fact, when in January 2024, which was just a few months after the Hamas's attack had happened in October of 23, when Benjamin Netanyahu for the first time said that there is no Palestine and there's no two-state solution. That itself showed that he cares, no way for the United Nations, General Assembly resolutions or the international regulations out there. But now what Donald Trump has said is something which is a clear shift away from even America's stated policy towards the Middle East. It is absolutely going to, to complicate everything. Even from India's perspective, we have been believing in a two-state solution, even though it remains elusive. So the manner is brash. It is not strategic prudence. It is also, like I said, reiterating an already extremely complex scenario in the Middle East. And in my opinion, if I would still try to sort of conclude, and my reading of the situation is that he is not perhaps going to do that. This is a psychological pressure that he's trying to build up. Eventually, when the normalization will happen, because he can foresee that he will not be able to pull off normalization so easily after what has happened, and how, Israel has kind of launched its counteroffensive, not only just, on Gaza, but also about the larger axis of resistance that Iran champions. So I think this is a pressure tactic, and we will have to wait and watch whether my reading of this is correct or not. But for now, yes, it has kind of sent shockwaves throughout Middle East, and also, I would say, the rest of the world.
Dr. Rao, that's a very interesting point, and it sort of reminds me of what we saw a few days ago vis-a-vis the tariffs against Canada and Mexico. First, those ambitious, problematic tariffs were announced, and then in the 11th hour, they were taken back. And Donald Trump, the astute businessman, also got what he wanted. Mexico and Canada paying for the border security. Now, are you reading something similar here, that behind this provocative proposal, there is something that he is seeking to achieve?
Yes, absolutely. So that's what I've been trying to, to assert from the beginning, which is that please don't take these things on face value. If you take these things on face value, it would be, a bit of I would say, a complete breakdown of what we know as the United States of America. So there is a certain way in which he's been, forward. I mean, there's a certain way in which he's been asserting his foreign policy and also his domestic policy with regard to Canada and Mexico. I've been saying it again and again for many months now that there is a free trade agreement that he already has with these two countries, where he's actually looking for creating a better trade, deal for the United States, because this particular free trade agreement is going to be up for renewal in 2026. That's one. The other thing has been about, about the borders, etc. So I think what Trump has been doing is to create an air of instability, among his allies and rivals alike, so that the pressure builds up to a situation where he's able to get away with the best possible, deal for the United States. And that the only thing is that if he lands up overdoing it, okay, I think that is where perhaps the danger lies. But then America is perhaps asserting that it is the world's biggest economy and the world's biggest military. So he's getting away with a lot of these things. I mean, he's been successful solely for forcing the Europeans to start spending at least 2% of their GDP and even more. Nobody could have believed that Europe is going to wake up from its slumber. A Biden administration, for all of its transatlantic commitment, could not really bring the Europeans to do that. And Trump did it. And the way he did it is because he threatened to leave the NATO. Yeah. And similarly, he's been able to return all the illegal immigrants to Colombia. You absolutely saw how the entire situation changed in 24 hours, with first the Colombian authorities saying that they will not do it, and then they absolutely agreed. Similarly with Panama. Panama has already cancelled its BRI project renewal with China, and is already rethinking, the two Hong Kong authorities that control 2 of the 5 major ports that the Panama Canal operates.
Right.
So what I'm trying to tell you is that this is a pressure tactic which is yielding results for Trump. But in the longer run, please remember that America is going to be there even after Trump goes away after 4 years. So this is going to inflict a certain real damage. I wouldn't, say that this perhaps is just overstated. Oh, yes, there will be damage because America is known in the world because of its allies and because of its forward positions, because of the bases it has all over the world. So how the allies are going to eventually, respond to this kind of a Trumpian coercion is something that only time can tell. But I perhaps would say that he is he is shrewd enough to understand how far and no further. So if he sees that this kind of a thing is not really yielding results that he wants them to yield, he'll probably change his tactics. So
right, Dr. Rao. Yes, Dr. Rao, finally, while Donald Trump can possibly get away with the things that he says, but what possible bearing could such statements have on a very fragile ceasefire that prevails in Gaza at the moment?
Yeah, so like I said, that this could be a complete, breakdown of sorts, because let's not forget that there is a China factor there. I mean, the countries in the region are already trying to diversify as much as possible. In fact, in the last few years, contrary to what many people believe, that the UAE and for Saudi Arabia, the most important security partner is US, and it's the economic partner where they look at China. I think that has already been changing. Now they have already started certain defense relationship with China as well. I think Donald Trump has to be careful, about treading this path, and there has to be, end of the day, a balance, so he has to see how far and no further.
On that note, Dr. Swasti Rao, thank you very much for joining us on the News Hour and sharing your perspective.